and your wife, and thank you all for welcoming me. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I grew up as an identical twin, and that of course made me an expert at spotting favoritism. So when I became a psychologist, I immediately began to spot favoritism of a different kind. And that is how much we favor the body over the mind. A few years ago, I was visiting friends, and their 5-year-old was brushing his teeth at the sink, getting ready for bed. And he slipped and he scratched his leg when he fell. He cried for a minute, but then he leapt up and reached for a box of bandages so he could put one on his cut. Now, this kid could barely tie his shoelaces, but he already knew that you have to cover a cut so it doesn't get infected, and you have to care for your teeth by brushing twice a day. We all know how to maintain our physical health and how to practice dental hygiene, and we know it from 5 years old. But what do we know about maintaining our psychological health? Nothing. What do we teach our children about emotional hygiene? Nothing. How is it we spend more time taking care of our teeth than we do our mind? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate teeth, I use mine all the time. But why is it we find our physical health so much more important than our emotional health? We get injured psychologically, really just as often as we do physically, injuries like rejection and failure. And those too can get worse if we ignore them, and they can impact our lives in dramatic ways. And even though we have scientifically proven techniques with which we can treat these kinds of injuries, we don't. And it doesn't even occur to us that we should. I mean, what do people hear when they're depressed? Oh, just shake it off, it's all in your head. Can you imagine saying that to somebody with a broken leg? Oh, just walk that off, it's all in your leg. We need to take our psychological health as seriously as we do our physical health, and this is especially true for physicians. Because your psychological health, like everyone's, has a huge impact on your ability to not just be happy in your lives, but to do your jobs well and effectively. Now, I could take the entire time I have here to quote all kinds of statistics about how mental disorders like depression and anxiety impact performance in the workplace. But I won't, because I didn't look them up. And I didn't look them up for a reason, you see, because depression and anxiety are mental disorders that cost industries billions of dollars a year. But it doesn't take a major depressive episode to impact your functioning or your emotional health. Loneliness does that. Rejection does that. Stress does that. For example, one study found that the mere exercise of imagining a future in which you end up alone was enough to significantly impair people's cognitive functioning. They literally did significantly worse on IQ tests by the mere thought exercise. So you can imagine if you actually are feeling lonely or distressed or stressed. Now, my work is focused on maintaining emotional health and how we can all be more productive and happier and more effective if we remained emotionally healthy, but I struggle to get my message out because the stigma against mental illness is actually more general. It's also a stigma against emotional health. Now, many people, perhaps some of you here today, consider emotions to be in the same category as, well, hemorrhoids, really. You know, uncomfortable inconveniences you don't talk about, you just wait till they go away. Just a few weeks ago, I started talking about emotions, and this one dude waved his hand dismissively at me and said, "Yeah, I don't believe in feelings." That's what he said, "I don't believe in feelings." Now, the person who said this was a senior executive in a financial company, and he said it in the first few minutes of a couple's therapy session with his wife sitting right next to him. And I was surprised, obviously, by how adamant he was, and so I did what psychologists do when they're surprised. They repeat the statement in the form of a question. So, you know this, yes? So, I said, "You don't believe in feelings?" And he said, I realize people have them, but they shouldn't matter, they're not reality. You know, like Bigfoot or aliens or something. There have been sightings, but without direct evidence, who knows? So I turned to his poor wife and I said, did you know your husband didn't believe in feelings? And she said, no, but that explains a lot. And so that's what I did. I laughed. I laughed so hard that she started laughing. And then she started laughing and he didn't laugh at all. He was very displeased. So I said to him, what, you don't believe in laughter either? And then I saw, his hands, his fists clenched. And I said to him, are you feeling annoyed? And he said, yes, I am annoyed. I said, great, that's one feeling you believe in. Now let's talk about some of the others and how they're impacting your marriage. Feelings are real, and they're informative. And if you want to maintain your emotional health, you have to be in touch with them, because whether you like it or not, they're impacting you. And let's look at an example of that, right? Just from real life. So let's say you get word, which I'm sure you do regularly, of some changes coming up in healthcare. And that really stresses you out, and it upsets you, and it angers you, and it does all of those things. And you stew about it when you get home. It's really eating at you. Well, brooding about upsetting and stressful things like that is something we all do, to some extent. We call it ruminating. Ruminating means to chew over. It's what cows do. Cows chew, and they swallow. Then they regurgitate the food up again, chew it again, swallow it again. I mean, it's disgusting, but it's great for cows. It's not great for humans at all. Because by doing that, by ruminating over and over again about distressing thoughts or events, what you're doing is you're putting a huge focus on all the negative things that are going on in your life. And, misery loves company is not just about people, it's about thoughts. And that predisposes you to start thinking of other things that make you unhappy or stressed and distressed or irritated. And when you do that habitually, rumination can become a very dangerous thing. Because we know from the research, and there's a lot of research about rumination, that people who ruminate habitually are much more clinically at risk for developing clinical depression, because you're spending so much time focusing on the negative. And if you develop clinical depression, your length of the episodes and the intensity of the episodes are significantly longer and more intense when you're a ruminator. Further, ruminating, when it becomes habit, predisposes you to eating disorders, substance abuse, alcoholism, because that's how we tend to manage our emotions a lot of the time, with food, with alcohol, with substances. They also predispose you to cardiovascular disease, because you're constantly sending your body messages that put it in a state of stress. So it's a dangerous thing. It's even more dangerous psychologically, because people always say to me, but ruminating is a form of self-reflection. You're a psychologist, shouldn't you be happy with self-reflecting? And, well, kind of yes and no, because there are two kinds of self-reflection, adaptive and maladaptive. Adaptive self-reflection involves problem solving. You're thinking through something in order to get an insight, a different perspective, an idea, a solution, so you know what to do, how to act. That's adaptive. And usually when you reach those insights, the internal tension you feel diminishes and you can let it go and move on. When it's maladaptive, it's just like an emotional hamster wheel. You're just going through it over and over again, that upsetting thought about these changes in healthcare, or the argument you had with your spouse. You just keep replaying it over and over. People replay things from years, just over in their head, their irritability. And when you do that, you get used to stewing instead of doing. And it really diminishes your ability to problem solve. In one study, they looked at women who found a lump in their breast. And they found that the women who ruminated waited on average 2 months longer to make an appointment with their doctor than the non-ruminators. And that can be a difference between life or death. But they were so used to just stewing, just focusing on all the bad and how it made them feel and thinking about it, instead of doing, that they literally weren't taking action. So rumination is something that we're all very vulnerable to when we're under stress. And you people are under stress, and I know that because I saw the coloring book in the middle of the program, and the crayons that we got. Got a lot of conferences, not a lot of coloring books, I'm just saying. So I know you're stressed. So if you find yourself ruminating, here's what you need to do. First of all, understand that if you're ruminating when you're home, you're at work again. And your family can tell you they're in body but not in spirit, and you're extending your workday, and your workdays are long, I know that to begin with, you're extending it unnecessarily. So if you haven't problem solved, if you haven't done the adaptive self-reflection, take 30 minutes, do the problem solving, figure out who you're going to speak to tomorrow, what meeting you're going to have, how you're going to address the issues that are upsetting you, if it's with a friend, when you're going to talk to the friend, or how. Figure out a plan, because we know from research that once you have a very specific plan, and specific means doing this at 9 o'clock, this at 9:15, specific. Once you have a specific plan about things that are troubling you, it's easier to put them aside. But the plan has to be specific. So figure out a plan and then put it aside. Secondly, if you've already done that, but you're just caught up in the rumination habit, which is what happens to us, you have to break the habit. And like any habit change, that's not necessarily easy, that's difficult to do. Now, rumination is vulnerable to distraction. The research tells us that a 2 to 3 minute distraction is sufficient to get your head off whatever the ruminative thought is in that moment. But the distraction needs to require concentration, right? You can't just not think about something that doesn't work. It gets a rebound effect. So 2 or 3 minutes of a crossword puzzle, words with friends, Candy Crush on your phone, whatever it is, interesting conversation, will make the urge pass. And if you're in that habit, you might need to do that 10 times an hour at first. But the more you do it, the more zero tolerance you have for the ruminative habit, the quickly the urge and the frequency will diminish, and you can then start to refocus on more positive things, which you need to do, because rumination is very damaging. Another common psychological injury that's much more damaging than we realize is loneliness. Now, I work with a lot of physicians, and what I find is that by the time they get home and they finish their phone calls and they finish all the other things, not to mention call and all these other, events that you have, they are so depleted. They truly don't have a lot left to be engaged in their family life and their personal life. So they're checked out, they're sitting there, but they're not listening to the dinner conversation. I work with physicians who are at dinner with their families every night, and they can't remember a thing about what was discussed at the dinner table. They're depleted. And what happens then is that over time, the conversations with your spouse, with your family, become more and more transactional, more and more fact-based. Pick up this one at this hour. Did you pick up the milk? Our rent is due. Whatever it is, the mortgage. And there becomes this distance. And people don't understand that what they're feeling is loneliness, because we associate loneliness with the loner in the cabin in the woods, who's not seen anyone for 10 years. Loneliness is defined purely subjectively. It's about emotional disconnection. 60% of people who report being lonely have spouses, live in families, but they're so emotionally disconnected they just feel it, except it doesn't occur to them that that's what it is. Loneliness takes us all by surprise, especially if the trappings of it are not what we typically think they would be. And the problem with loneliness is that it's extremely dangerous. Truly dangerous. It stresses us out so much, it puts us in a fight or flight response so much of the time that it not only increases our risk of cardiovascular disease, it suppresses the functioning of our immune system, and studies show that it increases the likelihood of an early death by anywhere from 14 to 25%. That's shocking. The conclusion in many of these studies are that it poses as significant a risk for morbidity and mortality as cigarette smoking. Now, we all think of cigarette smoking as deadly. Who thinks of loneliness as deadly? Cigarette packs come with warnings. Loneliness does not. And we're not even clear that we have it. And the problem psychologically with loneliness is that once you do have it, these distortions kick in. Unfortunately, a lot of the times when we experience psychological injuries like loneliness, rumination, failure, guilt, the things I discuss in my book, our mind begins to send us the absolute opposite message of what's real and what's true. We get misled by our mind. Our instincts send us down the wrong path, except we don't know it. So with rumination, it's like the urge. It feels very important to think about this thing we've thought about 100 times again. With loneliness, the distortion is that our relationships appear much less valuable to us than they actually are. And the people around us, it feels like they don't care for us as much as they do. These are distortions, but we are convinced by them. You can sit there with your spouse and you can feel very strongly, they know what stress I'm under. They haven't asked me once how I'm doing, like really how I'm doing. Or that friend hasn't called me in a month. What doesn't occur to you is you haven't asked your spouse either, and you haven't called a friend either. But you're just very clued in to the fact that people don't really care. And so that makes you more hesitant to reach out. It makes you push the very people away that you need to get closer to. And so loneliness becomes this real trap that people find themselves in, and they find it very difficult to get out. Because your insides are telling you that person doesn't care. If I reach out, they won't be interested. And so then by the time you reach out, you do it with such hostility or hesitation or such weirdness that it's self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the reaction you get. So what you need to do, if you identify yourself as feeling lonely, is A, realize that what your mind is telling you is incorrect, and B, if you're trying to reach out to a friend, think back to the time you last had a great time with them, what you enjoyed doing together, and really relive that experience. Look at pictures, and once you have a little bit of a smile on your face, that's when you text them. Or if you're sitting on the couch with your spouse and you're both checked out as usual, put down your phone, put the TV on pause, reach out and take their hand, and they're going to look at you like something's going on. What's happening? Why is this happening now? And because it's not usual. And you can just say something like, you know, I miss you. And they're like, well, that's strange because I'm right here. What's going on? And you might have to talk them through it because they're disconnected as well, right? But you could say, I just thought of that time when, you know, we used to talk about this so much. We don't talk about this anymore. Let's go and have coffee and talk about this. You know, I sometimes ask couples about, you know, date night. And people always roll their eyes. Well, who has time for date night? I'm like, I don't know, it's kind of important. When are you having couplehood? You know, you're home, your parents, or like, when is the actual couplehood? Couplehood is part of our identity, and yet it's being neglected. And so, yes, your relationship's in a terrible place. You're not investing anything in it. It's a garden, you've got to like tend to it a little bit. So you have to have the date night. Reach out and talk to the spouse. And if they seem shocked and amazed or surprised, say, I was just remembering. And just make it seem more, you know, and you'll find that a lot of the times they'll be like, yeah, I miss that too. I mean, you'll get a little softening back, and that'll show you that you are both in this artificial place that you don't need to stay in. So all these things are really important to understand, because these are the things that just go by us. You know, we're in that treadmill of life, and we just go on autopilot, just getting through the days, and our emotional health, and then our physical health, consequently, are really suffering, and needlessly so. Now, one of the challenges I face when speaking to certain groups, like physicians or law enforcement, is this really unfortunate bias that they're dealing with. Not your bias, but I guess your society, let's call it. And that is that, yeah, you have a stressful job. Right? Your job is stressful. That's part of the deal. You knew that when you signed up for it. So the underlying assumption there, and it's a terrible one, is that if you're having trouble managing that stress, it's you. There's something wrong with you. Because this is part of the deal. If you can't handle it, or if it's making you too stressed, or checked out, or miserable, that's because you are unable to handle it. You're somehow emotionally weak. In that way, you don't have what it takes. That's an underlying assumption that prevents physicians everywhere from not only asking for help, acknowledging to themselves that they need it, because in there is the acknowledgement that I'm not cut out for it, or I'm supposed to be able to handle this, so there's something wrong with me. Now, that is not just incorrect. I find it ludicrous that that's the case. But I understand why that's the case, and that's because we have a fundamental distortion in our society about what emotional strength actually is. And I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound really simplistic, but it's completely true. Our understanding of emotional strength is based solely on the tough guy and gal image we see in the movies. That's what we understand it to be. I'm going to give you an example. There's this movie with Liam Neeson called Taken. Have you seen this movie? All right, some of you have seen it. For those who haven't, he plays an ex-CIA operative, and his daughter, who's 18, 19, whatever, she calls him from Europe because she's about to be abducted by sex traffickers. So there's an upsetting call. And so he gets on the phone, he's on the phone with her, and she's literally, and they're coming for me, and they're coming for me, and he says, oh, you're going to be taken. That's why it's called Taken. And then they drag her, the sex traffickers, out from under the bed as she's screaming, and off to the other room. God knows what's happening to her there. And then the real baddie takes the phone, sees the phone, takes it, and Liam Neeson gets on and goes, I have a very particular set of skills. Skills that are going to be trouble for someone like you. That's a famous line, it's a meme from that movie. I have a very particular set of skills. Now, to me, if he would have delivered that line with a tear running down his cheek, would that have made him any less heroic? Would it have made him any less brave if his lip were trembling when he said it? His daughter just got abducted. He doesn't know if he's going to see her again, right? And that's our distortion. We believe that emotional strength is represented not by how we manage our emotions, but by the absence of them. We're not supposed to have them if we're strong. Is the message there? And in every action movie you have ever seen, and on television. And that's our cultural understanding of what emotional strength is. Well, it's an extraordinarily distorted one, and that makes Taken, it's not an action movie, it's science fiction. They all are. It's just not real. Real people have reactions to emotional distress. When emotional distressing things happen, they feel it, and they act despite it, not in the absence of it. And that's what's human. And so the idea is, I would love some action heroes to cry once in a while, just to let everyone else know, yes, your reactions are okay. You know, you're supposed to feel this way. But that's why it's so difficult for physicians and other people with, acknowledged stressful jobs to even admit to themselves that there's something wrong, because they're not supposed to. It means something about it if you do. And it doesn't. That's a distortion. Emotional strength is about how you manage your emotions, what you do with it, how you bounce back from difficult things, how you recover. It is a learnable skill. It is a muscle you can develop. And so it has to start with you acknowledging that there's distress going on, that you're not managing, that you're feeling lonely, that you're ruminating too much, that the stress is really getting to you. If you don't start with that, you can't get help. And if you get help, then you become stronger. That's a sign of strength, not weakness. Now, people say, well, how do I know if I'm stressed or distressed? Well, all right, so let's start. First of all, you'll see changes in your behavior, and small ones even. If you're somebody who always makes their bed in the morning, and you haven't made your bed in 2 weeks, something's going on. Something is going on. If you come home every evening and you're on edge and you're irritable and you're short and you're snapping, and it's not a day, it's not 2 days, it's been like this for a bit, something is going on. And I mean something emotionally. If you're disconnected, if you're spending your evenings on your laptop or your phone and you're not really engaging with people when you could be, when you should be, something is going on. If you're feeling like you just can't catch up and you never will, something's going on. Now, does that mean you're depressed? Maybe, but take your emotional temperature and ask yourself, what are you feeling? What do you need? What might you need? And then reach out if you need to reach out. Because that is impacting your performance at work. It's impacting your family. It goes to a much wider ripple than just you feeling not good or miserable. Now, the thing about stress management is that people, again, physicians, I work with many, and they tell me, well, it's just, you can't manage that stress, there's too much of it. It's not true. Here's why it's not true. We perceive of stress as this big one ball of stress, and when you think of it that way, no, it is what it is. But if I asked you to list every aspect of your job, every aspect, the patient interactions, the staff interactions, the EMR, the meetings, the financials, the administrative, the supervision, there are 30 aspects probably to your job, if not more, right? And if I asked you to list all of them, and then I asked you to rank them from the most to the least stressful, you would see that it's probably like a handful of those things are the real stressors. And it's very possible that those handful of things actually occupy only 4 to 5% of your time. They are not the bulk of what you do. Usually that's the case. And then if you break it down like that, then it's about how do you manage those things, right? How do you make those better? And so it's about how do you manage how do you reduce the stresses that you do have, and how do you manage the ones you can't reduce? Now, one of the ways to reduce, and this is applied to some of you and not to others, is delegating. And this is both at work and at home, because by delegating, and people say to me, well, I can't do that, it'll take me so long to supervise and make sure they do it right, it's not a worthwhile investment of my time. Not in the short term, but it is in the long term. Even fellows and interns are there for a year, so spend a month on them, that's an investment, but then you have a year of less things to do. And I ask people about, what do your kids participate in? Because they'll tell me like, oh, I finished at 8 o'clock, and on the way home I had to go to the supermarket. I'm like, why are you going to the supermarket? You have teenagers. And you have children, use them, and here's why you should. No, because listen, this is not a sweatshop. This is not child labor. The studies are very clear. They're very, very clear. Children who participate in household, in the household are happier. They're less entitled. They're more engaged. They do better at school. They're all around thriving for it. And people say, they do. They empty the dishwasher at 5. That's fine. At 5, empty the dishwasher. At 14, cook. Clean, participate in the household, you're a member of it. Teach your kids that they're part of a community, because they become horrible spouses afterwards. They don't think anything should be, it's all like, where's my, no, you have to participate, you have to do. So help them, put them to work, delegate to them, delegate to your staff, invest the time in doing that, it's important. And the other thing is that if you look at those 4 or 5 things that stress you out, and like I said, usually you'll find that they don't represent a big percent of your work week. But here's what happens. You don't like those tasks because they stress you out, you push them off. So instead of spending 4 hours on a Monday getting rid of all the stressful tasks, you leave it to the Friday or till the end of the month, and that means that stress is on you for 30 days. That is increasing your stress. How we naturally deal with stress by putting it off increases it dramatically and unnecessarily because it's there. It's adding to those things. So my advice about the stressful tasks, do that breakdown, look at those tasks, and if they are just a small percentage of what you do those first always. It will significantly minimize your overall experience of stress in the workplace, and maybe the same at home. And it's a simple thing that you can do. The other 2 quick things about stress is have a sanctuary, a safe zone at home where you can unwind. And please don't tell me it's the toilet. This is what, unless it's a magnificently designed toilet, it's not the toilet. Find a corner, a desk, something, but a place that you can unwind and listen to music, like something that you associate with peace, with quiet. Create it if you need to. And have at least one thing you do that's not being a physician. It can be yoga, it can be painting, it can be crochet, it can be golf. You have to expand your identity beyond just the job. It can be an hour a week, but find something, and it's not find, you used to have it probably when you were younger, reconnect to something, explore, but have that thing. It is really important that you're not just this one thing all the time. That alone is very, very stressful. So, I want everyone to be emotionally healthier, and especially you, because it's not just you, you are role models. You're role models for your staff, for your patients. You should be the leaders here in taking care of yourselves emotionally. 100 years ago, people began practicing personal hygiene, and life expectancy went up by 50% in just a few decades. Well, I believe life satisfaction can go up just as much if you all started practicing emotional hygiene and prioritizing your psychological health. And it won't take decades. You'll see the results of that very, very, very quickly. And you should. You really deserve to. And look, here's my bottom line. Our physical health and our emotional health are like twins, in my mind. So as a psychologist and as a twin, I'm asking you, treat them equally, please. Thank you very much.